Welcome, everyone. How's everyone doing? Thank you for coming out from in the cold. But I'm Lynn Tsang. I'm with the 1882 Foundation team, and I work on our programming, particularly our talk stories and our new lecture series, which Dr. Wong is one of the first to help us launch. And I also work in our public relations. So before I go into the formal program, I'd like to have Ted Wong, our wonderful executive director, come up and say a few words of welcome and get us started. And Ted is just so wonderful that he said he was not going to be here, but he decided to stay. So we're going to make Ted say a few words.
Cannot ignore an event which Janelle.
Exactly.
So,
But you invited me to.
I might. But, the topic is so interesting, we're having a series of these that might relate to, that are related to decisions, constitutional-like decisions that impact the Chinese and the Asian community. Topics which are so current right now, right? They just seem to repeat constantly. So we need to remind people of what is going on there. But so we founded the 1882 Foundation almost 20 years ago now, almost 50 years ago now. We're in this space. So thank you all for coming. And this is going to be live streamed, so watch out what you say, or if you don't want to say, maybe you should point out that we won't put a camera on you like that. So anyway, again, thank you so much. I'm so sorry, Janelle, that I have to.
No, please, I do not know you were ill. I'm sorry.
I'm not ill, but it may sound like I'm ill. But it's going to be live streamed. When will it be available
on YouTube in the next week or so. Yeah.
And so be sure to look up our this is the summary of what we do, the 1882 Foundation, the 4 initiatives we have. It's a quick primer overview. You can look up the QR codes and see what else. And it's a big font and page for people to belong here, and that's the way we survive. We survive because we have competent people like Alex, Ellen, and people with us, and Brody as well. So welcome all, and I pass back to you and the introduction and go from there. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ted. Is this anyone's first time in the 1882 office? Okay, well, thank you so much for coming. We have a wide range of programs that take place here, and Ellen does a major portion of the programming. So this office was renovated just a couple of years ago, and we are really trying to utilize the space to bring enriching public programming to the community. So thank you all for coming. So I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Janelle Wong, and I asked Janelle for a short biography. So she actually did give me a short bio, but she has an incredible background. So I'm only giving you a snippet of her background. Dr. Janelle Wong is the director of the Asian American Studies program at the University of Maryland, where she is also a professor in the Department of Government and Politics and American Studies. Dr. Wong teaches courses on race and racism and Asian American politics. And I've known Janelle for a few years now, mainly because she's really a force to be reckoned with in the community, and particularly the AAPI community in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia and nationwide area. And Janelle has, been on C-SPAN and has written, books and articles. So it's really great to have her with us to speak on this important topic with us today. So thank you, Janelle, for being here. Okay, so I'm going to give a quick introduction of the presentation, and then I'll pass it to Dr. Wong. So today's presentation will highlight historical cases in which Asian Americans played a central role in forwarding public access to education, with a focus on bilingual education and racial integration. We will then shift the focus to the present with attention to the fight for ethnic studies, book bans, and the complex politics around magnet school admissions. So for the next 30 minutes or so, Dr. Wong will give us a presentation, and then would you like us to take questions as we're talking, or maybe hold them?
Maybe hold on.
Okay, so we'll hold until the end, and so please start thinking of your questions. And so without further ado, I'd like to bring Dr. Wong to this stage, which is sort of a stage, but I'm gonna have.
It's great to be here. Thanks. It's really great to see Ellen, a former student, Ellen, all the great to see you, that's still here, even though I'm gonna go. And great to see my friends all around in the audience. So this talk is on Asian Americans and access to public education. And I'm going to start with some early Asian American advocacy examples. These are sort of some greatest hits. So let's start with this California case, Tape versus Hurley. And this is an 1885 case. And it starts in San Francisco. And you can see this image of the Tape family here. Next slide, please. So let me tell you a little bit about this family. The father came from, both the father and mother grew up in San Francisco for the most part. They were adolescents, and they were, especially the father, Mr. Tape, he was initially a servant for someone who owned a dairy farm, a white dairy farmer. And then he kind of made his way up into delivering milk. And then finally, he opened his own business as a delivery person. And this family became middle class, and they started to take more interest in civic life, and they moved into a predominantly white area in San Francisco. And so they have these 3 children also, and one of their kids is Mamie. And so if you look at the timeline, this case is 1885, right? And we're in the 1882 foundation. So this is a time of real anti-Asian sentiment and exclusion. And we see that this family demonstrates courage in this time of exclusion. So in 1880, the California state legislature passes a law that entitles all children to public education. And Mary Tape, the mother, tries to enroll her kids in Spring Valley Primary School. And the principal, whose last name is Hurley, Principal Hurley, declines. And she denies Mamie Tape entrance into Spring Valley.
Hear this. Teresa. Come hear this.
So the Tapes then sued the San Francisco Board of Education. And this case goes to the California Supreme Court. Now this is, as Ted mentioned, an equal protection case. Next slide, please. So the judge says that it's illegal. It's against it violates the Constitution to deny this Chinese child entrance to this public school. That is a white public school. And you can see here this quote, right? Directly invoking the violation of the Constitution. So this is the opinion at the Supreme Court of California. But Mamie Tape is again denied entrance. And this time it's because she doesn't have her vaccination records, and the school, which was actually a pretty new school, is at capacity now, according to the Board of Education. Meanwhile, some activists in the state are watching this case. And they decide at the same exact time this case is being decided, that they are going to pass a law. They're going to pass a law establishing separate schools for Chinese children. And so the decision is that Mamie cannot attend this Spring Valley Public School. Instead, she's denied. Now, her mother is angry, and her mom is kind of a firebrand. And if you look at this, she's like, look, this is in a paper, okay? This is in a widely distributed paper. She gets this op-ed full of anger and objection into a public paper. And she is like, my child will never go to your public Chinese school, okay? Sadly, though, what we find, next slide, please, is that actually she was unable to enroll her child in the white school. Instead, Mamie and her siblings attend, they're the first really to enroll in this segregated Chinese school. 10 years later, they moved to Oakland, where they do attend a integrated school, but it's really not until 1947. So this is many, many years, like many decades later, that the original law mandating or establishing these separate schools for Chinese children is repealed. Meanwhile, there have been slow integration in San Francisco's public schools. Next slide, please. So this really is one of the cases that sets the groundwork and shows this kind of bold move that Asian Americans and Chinese Americans made in terms of legal activism towards access to public education. In fact, some would say that it creates and establishes this right to public education, that Chinese kids were given the right to attend school, even if it wasn't in this integrated environment like they had pushed for. And you can see through the legal record that this becomes a case that is cited at times to make further equal protection claims and eventually to desegregate schools. Here's another kind of greatest hit of Asian American activism in public education, and it's Gong Lum versus Rice. Now note the date here, 1927. So this is another era. Next slide, please. And this case challenges educational exclusion. So this is really a case about Chinese Americans in Mississippi. If we think about the family's history, it's kind of interesting. So in this family, the mother had grown up in Mississippi most of her life. Father, I think he went by Joe, he actually crosses the Canadian border during exclusion, okay? And he makes his way from Detroit to Mississippi. And the parents raise this family, they have a small store. Some of you might see these kind of images of Chinese shop owners in the film Sinners, right? And so that's kind of the merchant shop owning role that this family, the Lum family, occupied. So here we see that the state constitution in this case mandates segregated schools, distinguishing white schools from schools for quote unquote colored students. That includes brown, yellow, and black. And in 1924, the father of this family wants his child, Martha Lum, to attend a white school. And so he sues the state. And Lum's does this in a particular way. He challenges his child's racial categorization as colored and says, no, she's not colored. She should go to the white school. Okay. And so here you can see the school is still, there's still these artifacts, right? Like this plaque from the Rosedale Public Schools. In this case, the family's petition to attend the white school is denied. And you can see here that William Taft, this is the Supreme Court. Okay, the case goes to the Supreme Court. And Taft is the Chief Justice. And his rationale is, you know what? This child is not being denied the right to an education. This child still gets an education because there are plenty of quote unquote colored schools for this child to attend. And one of the kind of interesting things about this history is there was a firebrand civil rights lawyer that was representing Gong Lum initially. He was a former governor of Mississippi. And he was like, I'm going to bring this equal protection case because denying this child access to this school is an equal protection violation. And segregated schools like this violate equal protection. But then, his name is Brewer, he moves to another case. And he is very successful with those cases. He starts to represent Black families in civil rights cases. And the Lum family gets a new lawyer. And this is an inexperienced lawyer. And this lawyer takes this case to the Supreme Court, or takes it over at the Supreme Court level, and he makes the claim that Martha Lum is not colored, but he does not bring up segregation. He does not challenge segregated schools in Mississippi. So all he's saying in this argument is that because Martha Lum is not Black, she should be able to go to the white school. But he does not center the fact that these schools are segregated, okay? And he doesn't really challenge it, and they lose, okay? So Lum does not challenge racial segregation, this case, does not challenge racial segregation. Rather, this access that white people have is what's at the center of this case. And so they make a claim to the privileges afforded to white people, but they don't challenge racial segregation. And in fact, it's a critical error in my view, because in the end, this case ends up reinforcing racial segregation. And it ends up reinforcing the separate but equal doctrine for decades going forward. Next slide. Okay, fast forward. Lau versus Nichols. This case, some of us were around when this case took place. Okay, this is the 1970s. And in the early 1970s, there were like 3,000 Chinese-speaking students, Chinese-American students in San Francisco. And about half of them English was not their dominant language, okay? And one of the students, a student in San Francisco, Kenny Lau, brings a suit with a bunch of other students, okay? This was like a group effort. And he makes this claim, and the suit makes this claim, that lack of bilingual instruction violates, again, it's an equal protection constitutional violation case. And he also makes this claim that the 1964 Civil Rights Act is passed and it violates the Civil Rights Act. And they lose in federal court because at the district court level, the court is like, well, they have the same curriculum, they have the same schools, so that's kind of like equal. And we don't have a problem with that. Okay, so at the district level, they lose. But they're like mad, right? And they go on. And actually, they bring this case. They appeal to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court rules in their favor. And the Supreme Court is like, Okay, we don't know about equal protection. We're not going to deal with that as much, but this violates Section 601 of the Civil Rights Act. And the ruling is that schools cannot just provide the curriculum and facilities in a uniform way across students, but there can be differential learning supports to facilitate access to education. And what we see here then is this really important decision that schools must provide affirmative learning opportunities to facilitate students' education. This has a huge effect, So by 2020, public schools nationwide enrolled almost 5 million English language learners. And you can see the vast array of languages that are fairly common with language supports, thanks to LAO. And the Department of Education shows, their research shows that the vast majority of these students get this differential language support. So the effects are huge. So what do we learn from these historical cases? There's a lot to celebrate. There's a lot of courage shown in times of oppression. But one of the things that we also have to reflect on is that some of this is like courageous but troubling, right? And I think these cases give us an opportunity to think about Asian Americans' role in providing and fighting for access, but also what is the extent to which our faiths are linked to the faiths of other groups? And that's what these cases kind of embody. So please keep that in mind as we keep talking. I just want to bring up this other situation, because there's a lot of celebration of firsts in the Asian American community, right? And so I teach at the University of Maryland, so do some colleagues, and some people went to the University of Maryland. And here's a historic first. The University of Maryland's first Asian students, the first Korean student enrolls in 1888, and the first Chinese student in 1915. Now we're at the 1882 project, right? These students are enrolling during Chinese exclusion and Asian exclusion. How did they do that? Let's keep talking. And I'm not talking about people coming just for like school. They come and they settle and their kids go to Maryland and then their grandkids go to Maryland, okay? And it is not until nearly 5 decades later that the first Black student enrolls at the University of Maryland. And that only happens because the NAACP sued Maryland. And this case went on for 3 years. So this case shows us that there were always narrow exceptions to Chinese exclusion. And we need to pay attention to those. Why? Because these exceptions preview the immigration laws that have shaped our community today, that prioritize highly educated immigrants from Asia. These exceptions set that foundation of selective recruitment. And as a result, they set the foundation for the model minority stereotype. The model minority stereotype doesn't start in 1965. It actually, you can trace it back longer to these exclusions. I mean, not exclusions, these exceptions to exclusion. Okay, so again, what do we make of these cases? There's courage, there's first, and we should celebrate them. And to what extent are our faiths linked to the faiths of other groups? And I think this Maryland case helps us to think really hard about that. So our role deserves more attention in this time of threat to public education. And so here's March 1, 2025, designating English as the official language of the United States. And we're seeing a real rollback in the exact kind of bilingual supports that Lau versus Nichols signifies and achieved. So basically, what has happened in the last 6 months, almost all of the federal employees that support English language learning have been laid off. And hundreds of millions of dollars in bilingual program support from the federal government has been stripped away or threatened when it comes to public schools. So again, this legacy is tenuous. Okay, I'm going to shift gears a little bit because there are other cases we should think about. We have this role of legal activism in our communities, right? So another high-profile case involving Asian Americans is public magnet school admissions. And why have there been attempts to reform public magnet school admissions? Because sometimes we see, like at Stuyvesant, that there doesn't seem to be access for all groups. And you can see that Asian Americans are more likely to enroll in a public magnet school, like Stuyvesant, the public magnet school of public magnet schools, right, than other groups. And there tends to be higher income among those who attend public magnet schools. Let's bring it closer to home. Thomas Jefferson High School in Fairfax, Virginia, right? Thomas Jefferson High School, sometimes ranked #1 school in the nation. It is a very, very high profile school, and it has selective admissions until recently. They did institute reforms. Look at this. Do these public magnet schools serve everyone? You can see that Thomas Jefferson, less than 3% of students at Thomas Jefferson High School qualify for free and reduced lunch. Now it's in a county, Fairfax County, where 30% of students qualify for free and reduced lunch. So there's been a lot of controversy in our community over access and over changes to magnet school admissions. And what we see is that lawsuits, mostly by Asian Americans, have challenged race-neutral changes to admissions to try to address some of these problems and barriers to access. In every single magnet school admissions case, we see the same kind of strategy and the same legal counsel. The legal counsel is called Pacific Legal Foundation. Now that sounds kind of Asian, right? Pacific Legal Foundation. But guess what? This is not an Asian American law firm. This is the masthead. This is the leadership. Okay, going. What were the results of race-neutral reforms at Thomas Jefferson? And when I say race-neutral reforms, forever, the application has not had race or name on it, and that includes after the reforms. Okay, this is not race-conscious admissions. These are changes that the reviewers don't know the race of the applicant. The applicants after reforms increased by over 1,000 students. Okay, so they went from mostly test-based to something more holistic. And over 1,000 more students are now in the application pool. Next. And what were the reforms on equity? You see economically disadvantaged students jump up from 1% to 26%. And English language learners increase as well. And you can see some movement on access for Black and Latinx students. Next slide. Well, what about Asian American students? We're here talking about Asian American legal activism, right? Overall, the proportion of Asian American students did change from 73% to 54%. Asian Americans were still the majority, and Asian Americans were actually admitted at the highest rate if you look at rates of admission. Okay, so the charge of its parents is that there's intentional discrimination. If there was intentional discrimination against Asian Americans by changing from test-based admissions to something else, would you see Asian Americans getting admitted at the highest rates? That seems kind of strange. But most importantly, not all Asian Americans were benefiting from the old system. The system that those Asian Americans who are suing want to keep in place. Why? After the reforms, the number of low-income Asian American students went from one low-income student admitted when it was a test-based admission policy to more than 50 students. Okay, so is it anti-Asian discrimination as those who are suing, who are mostly Asian American, are claiming if we see these kinds of statistics for low-income Asian American students? It's really something I think we have to think deeply about. This is my last example of Asian American, not yet, legal activism. How many of you are familiar with this case? Okay, everybody, right? This is a case where we saw Asian Americans both really fighting for affirmative action and Asian Americans who were very much wanting to end affirmative action. And this case has also had spillover effects. So here, this is back in the Biden days, okay? Biden's government does the study of minority contracting and finds that significant gaps in the number of minority contracts, not numbers, but the proportion of minority contracts are present when we look at Black, Latina, Asian American, and Native American business owners. They're not getting as many contracts proportionally as white business owners. And so there's a program to address this. It's called a minority set-aside program. And if you're an Asian American business owner, you can apply for a certain number of contracts that are set aside. It's not a lot, but to kind of try to address this gap. Okay. But this is probably not going to survive these federal minority contracting programs, right? Because Students for Fair Admission, that admissions case is taking aim and is a tool to dismantle not only the consideration of race in admissions, but the consideration of race in minority contracting programs, right? So federal court extends SFA, the Harvard case, to invalidate minority contracting programs. Guess who's behind this case? Our friends at the Pacific Legal Foundation, same people. So these are some examples of Asian American legal activism in the realm of education. And when I think about these cases, what I feel is this is kind of a hopeful history in some ways, and it's a bit of a troubling history. And so I would say that Asian Americans are kind of at a crossroads when it comes to advocacy for access to education. Thank you.
Much, Dr. Wong. This is a very heavy topic, and I often, from the outside, people look at the Asian community, not ethnically part of the Asian community. They tend to see Asian as one monolithic thing, and that we go forward with one political opinion. But the reality is that within the Asian American community, there's such diversity, as with any group, of thought, perspective, and political opinion. So that gives us a lot of food for thought. And now I think there was a question that popped up over here, right? So let's take some questions.
Not a question, but I also was observing, like, I didn't see the white kids, like, that they reduce or increase in knowledge. But my question actually really is, like, as an Indian, I've been here 20 years, now, back in 1880, we were still under British rule. So we could not immigrate anywhere. Not even like Pakistan, Bangladesh, Myanmar, or many of the countries like in Vietnam. So do you think if we were not colonized, we may have been immigrated, had a chance before immigration before 47 or 48, even Korea, like 47, 48, they got immigrants.
There were there's some Indian migration,
But that
including my
was mostly-
hometown.
But before-
Sikh Americans went to Northern California.
So
during that
what
time.
was their situation like? Because they're not Chinese technically, they're Asian, yes,
Yeah,
but it said Chinese, it didn't say Asian solution.
yeah, so Indians started to become also prohibited through
Sure.
Asian exclusion as well. So I'm not, what is your question?
So I'm wondering because it said Chinese Exclusion Act, it doesn't say Asian.
Ah,
Exclusion
no,
Act.
no, okay, so yes.
That's what I'm wondering.
So it starts with Chinese exclusion
Yes.
and then that extends mostly to East Asia. But there are ways in which it affects also immigration from India. So yes, it starts with Chinese immigrants and a prohibition on, with some exceptions, on Chinese immigration. And then by 1924, most places in Asia, there was very, very small, like maybe 100 people or less that were allowed to enter. So yes, it affects everything. Except like, it affects all Asian.
I have a question in regards to kind of like, let's say Thomas Jefferson, right? And the makeup of the students have now shifted. Now, when would we expect to see, okay, what are the hard results, right? Like, because admissions is only part of education, right? Like, what are the metrics that we're seeing as outcome? Like, is it pulled from graduation rates? Is it kind of pulled through from college acceptance rates? Or even if you go kind of further out, is it the success of the student as an adult? And I'm asking this because arguably, I'm just putting out there, like, yes, Stuyvesant is an okay school, but I came out of Hunter College High School, which is, agnostic of the whole public school system, even though it is technically a public school, right? And, I'm just trying to look back, like, what would the makeup of my school and my peers be if it wasn't a test-based system, right? Small school, graduating class of 150, and our pull-through, half of us went to top 25 schools, a quarter of us went to Ivies. Like, that's insane. Like, so what, like, is there someone looking at these metrics? Like, how
for
does it
sure.
happen? Like, and, we can't tell for like a decade, right?
Yeah, so, these are public schools. What is the goal of a public school? What metric are you looking at? But yes, people are looking at many things. What does it mean for a public school to be successful? Some say access, right? Some say go into the Ivies. I will leave that to you all to think about it. But, right, as soon as they changed the admissions criteria at Thomas Jefferson, they looked at GPA and that had stayed the same. So there wasn't a change in GPA. One of the things also that I shall share is that some Asian American students testified, and one of them, Ethan Park, he went to a magnet admissions case, a magnet school, and like sometimes Asian American students feel like their learning is not as robust because they're not experiencing a lot of different people in their schools. And so there can be a downside as well. But yeah, you can look at all the things because you can do a survey. But it just depends. What are you going to prioritize as your measure of success?
Any other questions?
So I want to talk about affirmative action, like, why do you think affirmative action only comes in like business, education, some sectors? Why not like sports, entertainment, that can help Asian Americans, something on that level? Why isn't those things talked about, like, hey, where Asians are less number, we should talk about that, because if you want to talk about this, why don't we talk about this?
I mean, I think it is talked about. There's not a lawsuit because maybe the stakes are pretty different.
So you talk a lot about how initiatives, to support public schools in the courts have been continuous rolling since like 1888, right? With Asian Americans being the forefront and doing the advocacy work. Right now, currently, how are you seeing Asian Americans rallying and supporting public schools? And you mentioned, what does it mean for a public school to be successful? In what ways have you seen the Asian American community kind of really challenge the image of what it means to go to public schools? There's always the spike of like, oh, I want to go to Ivy League, whatever. But like, what does it mean to actually be in public school? And for full confidence, I am a public school kid. So like what, in different areas, like what does it actually look like? And we always talk about schools in the West Coast and East Coast. How have you seen it done in like the South, the Midwest?
It's a really great question. How many of you, regardless of racial background, went to a public school? K through 12. Most people. Asian Americans have not given up on public schools. Asian Americans are integral to public education in the United States. It is my dream. It is my dream. Like full disclosure, that Asian Americans take their eye off of the case they just maybe won, which is SFA, right? And what if we put that energy that was so focused on admission to Harvard, where very few people get in, and move that energy to advocacy for public education? And Asian Americans led that fight to get more tax dollars to our K through 12 system, to expand the number of seats in our public colleges, to make public education as like wonderful as it could be. And it was Asian Americans who led that fight. Am I seeing that? These are the high profile cases, right? Asian Americans fighting over admissions to magnet schools, which again, so few students go to those magnet schools, right? It's not to say that they're not valuable to some families, but it's not every family's resource, right? But what if Asian Americans took the lead to make every school as like exciting and as attractive as those magnet schools? Like, do we have that under our power? I think we might be able to do it if we can like redirect our energy. All the energy that went into SFFA and into these magnet school fights could go into like, let's invest and let's get other people to invest in public education for all.
I mean, I'm sorry.
I had a follow-up. I know that you meant like, okay, how do we reinvest our energy is right now, kind of like on the ground, are there any activists, any politicians, any folks doing local work, doing groundwork that you've noticed that really push the narrative and shaping and like building that momentum for the community?
Yeah, definitely there are groups, and when I think about it, mostly Southeast Asian groups that have been 100% focusing on access to public education and improving public schools. But I don't think it's that hard of a turn, because the vast majority of people in the US, of students, do go to public schools, and the vast majority of Asian Americans go to public school and care about public schools and want to see schools, I think, flourish. So it's really about like, could we lead that campaign to, especially when we see these threats? There is a threat to public education right now. I think Asian Americans could be some of the leaders to, because a lot of us went to public school, to really move, like help us move through this threat and come out with a new kind of idea about what public school is. Let's like rethink all of it.
I mean,
Easy for me to say.
no, I think that's right? Because, when you're talking about budget cuts, the first thing that always gets slashed is the education budget, right? Let's take the Asian out of this, right? Let's look at it, think about it holistically, right? Like, what's the not asking for solution, but like, how do we solve the fact that we're not paying the best and brightest to be teachers, right? And that's one fundamental flaw, right? And that's why private or charter schools thrive, because they are getting that kind of talent, right? Like, when do we recognize holistically as a country, or even locally, that like, well, why are we shoving $1 trillion into the Department of War, right? Like, why is that money not going into education? Like, what's the answer to that? Because I feel like it's so loaded in terms of like that out there in the government and foreign, that is not going to the right places.
So prioritizing education, it does align with the stereotype about Asian Americans, obviously, right? But let's turn that to our advantage and think about what role Asian Americans could play in, yes, trying to gather energy for a campaign to more public dollars, I think, should go to education, and yes, could go towards teacher salaries. It's not my area. I'm not an education scholar.
Sure, kind of looking at, there are folks in this room who are obviously here, but there are also folks on the screen that are probably just like everyday folks who have kids who are in school, who have families who are currently in school. What is one or a few things that you think would be like a stepping stone to starting to ask those questions of how do I better, support my local school district? Or how do I better advocate for the resources and funds for my school district?
Okay, I will also open it up to others, but I think if I just take my personal experience, you can join coalitions of people who, for instance, in Montgomery County, this is where I live, I don't live in DC, there's a coalition called the Black and Brown Coalition for Educational Equity. And I follow them and try to take their lead when it comes to how to support equity. So that might be writing a letter, that might be testifying at a budget hearing, right? Or it might be bringing other Asian Americans into conversation with this coalition. So that's what we're doing right now. It can also be, yeah, you know what? People find budgeting in any county really boring. All the power is there, right? And so sometimes I think that kind of like showing up at a budget hearing and making sure there's accountability and people see an Asian face there, not just for a magnet school admissions case, but for other types of issues. I think that is important.
Yeah, well, this is participation, right? Like, do the simplest thing, go vote, not general election vote. Vote through the Board of Education vote, right? Like, I live in Montgomery County as well. I vote in every election. I have no voice in that race. I have no children. I'm gonna have children. But I still participate in the Board of Education vote because you will like to have a say in who's guiding, the future, right? And it's low hanging fruit. It costs you no time or effort.
So I have a final question if no others. Janelle, you were talking about how it would be great if more Asian Americans were involved in advocacy and trying to get more dollars for public education. I guess I have some of my own, not even theories, just thoughts, but what is what is the challenge to getting more Asian Americans to do these things? Because I do actually get a little annoyed when people say, oh, Asian Americans are involved in politics, or not doing this, that, because I see many people involved in many sorts of advocacy, but I just wonder, like, what's the challenge in getting more people? I think it's because I guess I just started thinking, is it because we're not a unified voice? There's so many different opinions and people aren't thinking about the long-term strategy. They're just thinking short-term, I want my kid to get into Harvard, but they're not thinking about, okay, what is this impact down the line? Because a lot of people maybe don't know this, but while Asian Americans, a group, do succeed at the K through 12 level, Asian Americans are the lowest representation at higher levels of management. So there's clearly
That's changing pretty fast.
Okay, that's good. So I just feel like there's a gap, but I wonder, like, what is the challenge to getting Asian Americans to work toward the same thing?
So that's a different topic, but is one that I think about a lot, which is so one of the reasons that Asian Americans aren't participating in politics at the same rate as other groups has to do not with like they're politically apathetic or we care more about other things than politics. It's that we don't get asked to participate at the same rate as other groups. And that's partly because of like where we live, right? We live in places that are not like, we're mostly concentrated in places that are not competitive districts when it comes to politics. And so we don't have the same kind of outreach that other groups do. And that's kind of a structural challenge. It has nothing to do with whether we, are interested in politics. The other thing though, is that despite our diversity, we actually do have some emerging issues where we look distinct from other Americans. It's not what you think. So a lot of campaign managers think, oh, let's go after Asian Americans. And then they're like, model minority. They're like, we'll emphasize education. They're like, forever foreigner. They're like, and immigration, right? Those are not the issues that Asian Americans appear particularly different from anyone else on. Education is not often a top even 5 priority for Asian Americans. jobs in the economy. It's just like it is for everyone else, right? And if you look at some data, other Americans care more about education as a priority than Asian Americans. It's not our top thing. What is a top kind of consensus issue among Asian Americans? There is consensus, and we look different from Americans more generally when it comes to universal health care or government-sponsored healthcare, the environment, more progressive tax policies, and gun control. So people think Asian Americans are like education voters and immigration voters. No, we are gun control voters, environment voters, healthcare voters. So that doesn't necessarily like drive this agenda that I would like us to focus on, educational investments in public education. But it does show there's actually some consensus there, even despite our vast diversity. It's actually remarkable.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Let's give a round of applause to Dr. Janelle Wong. Thank you so much, Janelle, for driving all the way from Maryland. The traffic was probably not good today. But thank you everyone for coming. We do have a space to mingle in the back, so you're welcome to get some water, coffee, tea. Just so you know, if you're not subscribed to the newsletter, I believe you can go to our website and subscribe to the newsletter. But we have a bunch of programs that are coming up in the next few months. And Janelle talked about the Mississippi Delta Chinese. We just had a rural Chinatown conference in Memphis. And we also took a field trip to Mississippi. So we have that conference every 2 years. And then we also have a Chinese American Women in History conference that will be in September of next year. And so this is part of the programming that leads to that conference. So if you like our programming, please go to the website and check that out. And follow us on our Instagram at 1882 Foundation. And Ellen is kind enough to manage that. So if you took any pictures or you have something to say, please tag us at 1882 Foundation. And help support us in getting the word out. So thank you again, Dr. Wong. Another round of applause. And thank you all for coming.